you, Joe Nagy. I can't understand why you got a problem with this. All we got to do is ban conflicts of interest like they do at local government. So how could that rule not get into state parliament and not get into federal parliament? And secondly, all we need to do is make sure that whatever those, I was going to say buggers, but I better not say that word, that whatever they do is transparent and that there is adequate and lots of disclosure, because that's why this happens. You know that as lawyers, people rob things when there's no one looking. This is the same thing with this problem, that we can't find out what they're doing until well after it's gone. Thank you very much.
Well, we have strict rules against conflicts of interest. Lee would know more about it than anybody else in the room, because we have very strict rules against conflicts of interest. What we have in New South Wales, because ICAC has been effective, is also a terror factor, in the sense you'll get caught if you do it. What I think we're here tonight about is to say, when you break those rules federally, there's nobody to catch you out. We want an organisation. We want the rat catcher.
Yeah, just a couple of words. In the war, over Britain, the big war, they had a real problem with the pilots. They developed a thing called a Messerschmitt twitch. Now, when you talk to a local councillor and you start using the word ICAC, he starts a twitch.
Poison.
Okay. How would you characterise the behaviour of Andrew Robb towards the end of his...
Sell out!
It's really very awkward, because I see it's being filmed, so there's no way in the world that I'm going to tell you what I actually think about that. But isn't it bloody obvious? I mean, it's just... we've got... I saw something funny on the other day, that some Trump supporter writing some sort of email suggesting that they were saying, what, they complain about Trump getting Ivanka and the family in the house? Oh, but it was okay with you Democrats when JFK brought his brother Bobby in as Attorney General. Well, putting aside the fact that that was more than 50 years ago, it did actually lead to this. People were so shocked at that at the time that they brought in rules in America to prevent that from ever happening again. Trump is getting around them by actually not putting them on the payroll, you see. It's the same thing here. We have rules about this. When politicians can leave Parliament with already 1 foot in the camp of some major player. Why are we paying politicians really healthy pensions if they can leave federal parliament and collect their pension and on top of it go to work for one of the companies in the very industry in which a ministry...
Yeah, and everyone understands, I take it, that the money he's getting for a part-time consultancy is $880,000 a year.
Shame.
Unbelievable.
Shame.
Unbelievable.
$880,000 a year plus his parliamentary pension.
Shame.
Anyway.
Yeah, Brian Concannon. Yeah, I'm totally disillusioned in the ICAC process. The Fitzgerald inquiry did the goods, but since then, McDonald then went down. But a federal ICAC, like I think that they won't go ahead with it if it doesn't do any good for the elites, for the deep state. The New South Wales ICAC got rid of Barry O'Farrell with the mysterious note that he accepted the bottle of Grange. Like he was obviously set up because he didn't want to privatise electricity. So the ICAC, New South Wales ICAC, was used to get rid of Barry O'Farrell, to put Mike Baird in, who was fully prepared to sell us all out and privatise electricity. And another thing, the Oscar affair, like, there should have been a royal commission into that. Like, Godwin Gretsch fraudulently produced a document to try and get Kevin Rudd and Wayne Swan the sack. And it was proved to be fraudulent, but there was no investigation, or a little investigation.
Brian, that's what ICAC is, a royal commission. It's a standing royal commission.
If Labor had done the same thing, they would have been roasted. But Liberals, Turnbull gets away with murder. But my main thing is, what do you think about the ICAC, New South Wales ICAC, how they got rid of Barry O'Farrell to put Mike Baird in and privatise their electricity? Was that done to for the elites? Like, they don't want a federal ICAC because it's not in their favour. They'll only let it happen if they can get some good out of it. They got some good out of the New South Wales one. They got rid of Barry O'Farrell, and they got our electricity privatised.
Brian, I'm going to stop you there. Would anybody be bored if I just tell you a personal anecdote about the O'Farrell event? It's actually a story I haven't been able to tell, because that inquiry, ICAC has never reported on it. So there was a journalist I met earlier. Please, this is not on the record, all right? I'll get into a lot of trouble if this goes on the record, but I'll tell you an odd story. Brian, sorry to tell you, there was no setup there. It all was weird. What had happened was, we'd been trying to negotiate to get Mr. O'Farrell to get him in to give evidence over a period of time. And what had happened was, he was on a trade mission to China. All the premiers were with the Prime Minister. They were all in China on a trade mission. So we had to bring him back. Anyway, so he came back towards the very, very, very end of the inquiry. The inquiry was supposed to end on, I think it was a Tuesday. And it's sort of dragged over. It had a real impact on me because my aunt was being buried on the Wednesday morning. And so I said to my junior, look, I can't be there tomorrow morning. My aunt's being buried and I want to go to the funeral. And he said, I can't be there either, because we thought the hearing was going to finish on the Tuesday. He said, I've got another case elsewhere. So I thought, oh, bugger it, I've got to go. So we knew nothing about this. We didn't know anything about this thank you note. At around about, in my emails, at around about 9:05, the barrister representing Nick DiGirolamo sent me an email. Well, you can imagine at that time I was getting sent emails from everybody under the bloody sun. So I didn't bother to open it. And I went down to ICAC, and I was sitting in the little room that I had. And what I was trying to do was shuffle the papers together. It was on the Wednesday before Easter. And I was just trying to clean up the room because we had to go away for Easter and then start a new inquiry. Anyway, so I was sitting there, and somebody came in and said, have you seen this? And they had a printout of the email, and it had that thank you card in it. I know exactly how I respond, because I sort of bellowed at the top of my lungs, fuck me dead. Not possibly the most elegant response, but it just gave me the shock of my life. It showed that the evidence that Mr. O'Farrell gave was, and I cannot explain it, just completely and utterly wrong. And then that morning he resigned. Now, Brian, you seem to think there was a deeper conspiracy. There wasn't. But I will tell you, there are a couple of mysteries. Can you use the microphone, please? So sorry. There are a couple of mysteries even still to me. It was a bottle of 1959 Grange, as you probably know. And during the questioning on the day before, I'd asked him, I said, look, if you had that bottle of wine, it's not as though you still wouldn't have it. It's not. And we joked about it, because I said, it's not the sort of thing you'd tear the head off it on a Friday night with some pizzas. And he agreed, blah, blah, blah. It was all very friendly. Where's that bottle of wine gone? It existed. We know that bottle of wine was taken to his house. Whatever happened to it? You can't lose a 1959 bottle of Grange. I'll never work out what happened in those few hours. It wasn't intentional. He wasn't set up. It's almost like he accidentally set himself up. It's a terrible story. It was, as far as I can tell, pretty good bloke, Barry O'Farrell.
Tony Abbott will auction it off at his next fundraiser, I bet.
Well, that might be right. Gee, I'd love to see that bottle of wine, because I think, you say in a museum of the New South Wales Parliament, wouldn't you like to see it in a cabinet next to the thank you card, which is still an exhibit down at ICAC? I'm so sorry. That was a pretty stirring couple of days. The next day, The Australian published their first time that they attacked me personally. On the front page of The Australian, there was an article attacking me personally, saying that I was disgrace and I set O'Farrell up and I was a shocking bloke. If you went in 3 pages, Graham Richardson had written an article saying I was a disgrace because I hadn't gone far enough.
Oh, there you go.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Jim McElroy's my name. Thanks very much for the talks, and I think one of the issues I'd like to raise is the broader question of what is corruption, which the speakers did address. And in third world countries like Africa and in Asia, in some Asian countries, it's more clear. But I think one of our biggest problems in Australia is what is corruption? Corruption is the integration of the public sector with the corporate sector. And what we're seeing with the example of Andrew Robb, I could give you some more. What's with Anna Bligh being head of the... It's both parties, by the way, both parties. Anna Bligh being head of the Bankers Association. You've got Mike Baird going back to his old job with the NAB at a higher level, no doubt. Giles, the former Northern Territory Chief Minister, is headed off to work for Gina Reinhardt. But this is immediately after they've left their jobs. And also, my understanding is, and I'd like some comments on this, there's one of the problems that we have today is a passage between the higher levels of the public sector and the private sector, and they come back again. That we're seeing heads of departments moving into the private sector and they come back in another job. And we're seeing an increasing integration. And how do we untangle what is corruption there, where people are sort of moving between one and the other? I'll just give one more example very quickly. In my opinion, what is happening with Westconnex here in Sydney is corruption. We are seeing a massive integration between, you know, companies like Transurban and so on, and the Sydney Motor Corporation. And where does government start and private finish? Massive amounts of money, $20 billion, maybe we think it's a lot more, is being paid out to these people. It's not called corruption. You know, I think we've got to dig down further and find out, you know, we've basically got a corrupt system there. That's the point I'm trying to say. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Confidence. Answer that question.
Yeah, no, well, that we don't have a ready answer, because the borderline between willful breach of duty for private gain and mismanagement, misgovernance, the huge waste of money on the other side, that dividing line is really difficult, because they merge into one another. And until the facts come out, it's very, very difficult. And this is why important people up at ICAC have often got to dredge through stuff to find out whether it was just non-corrupt gross mismanagement or whether it was corrupt. I mean, there's that dividing line is, and that's why we need, as we did manage to get hold of the papers on that cross-city tunnel. Remember, they were able to get hold of the papers, but for the WestConnex and for a whole number of other large projects, how do you get the stuff, and why are they entitled to claim commercial privilege in these contracts? That's right.
Secrecy equals corruption.
Mr. McElroy, I reckon he's going to win. That's going to be the best question of the night. The thing is that what you said is absolutely accurate. It's a very, very different idea. If you've got a thing, and I'm not suggesting for one moment these people are corrupt, but if you've got a politician who have particular skills, whether they're legal skills or banking skills or whatever sort of skills, and they leave Parliament and then go to work for these organisations, they've got genuine skills to sell. So that it's okay in one sense, but it seems wrong to us. So the definition of corruption, you're right, it's problematical. Let me give you an example. What about this? What say it was established that one of the political parties was funding the campaign of a popular independent in a seat. Why? Because I'm not suggesting this has happened, but say Labor wanted that independent to win rather than a coalition candidate. So they fund that and they keep it secret. Is that corruption? I would have thought so. Yeah. But it's not. It's not. Do you know what? That happens all the time. It happens both sides of the House. I've always said it's one of those wonderful things. Corruption is non-partisan.
Cathy Vaughan, Politics in the Pub Committee. This question is sort of about the grey area between the legal tax evasion and the illegal, the legal tax avoidance and the illegal tax evasion. So I just wanted to recount that Sigmundur David Gunnlaugsson, who was the Prime Minister of Iceland, was named in the Panama Papers. And through public pressure only, 10% of the Iceland's population of 330,000 were there, accumulated outside of the parliament and said out. He wasn't ousted through any kind of legal pressure, only through the public voice. And he had to step down and take a temporary representative. Now, unfortunately today, the Independence Party, who are part of the coalition, three-party coalition, that are now govern Iceland. I'm sorry, the leader of that was also named in the Panama Papers, but I'm thinking of somebody else that we know much better. Malcolm Turnbull was also noted to have offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, as well as many Australians. So what do we do about these offshore accounts in Australia that are taking so much out of our public purse? Do we rely on, can we define better the between tax evasion and tax avoidance, what's legal and what's illegal? Or is it only public pressure that can solve this problem? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a very important question, and I'd just like to deal with two things that flow from it. One is that the disclosures in the Panama Papers and more recently in Unaoil in Monaco is the result of massive whistleblower move, right? And I mentioned whistleblowers, but the willingness for people to ship to the press gigabytes worth of emails out of Panama or out of Unaoil is a new form of whistleblowers, and we ought to be, and it's amazing how they do it. The big data to analyse these things, and prosecutions might follow. But whistleblower protection is really key to a lot of this stuff that's going to, hopefully will emerge from ICAC proceedings. The second point is that we are shockingly under-resourced to find out who in Panama owns our property. We have massive numbers. Every wealthy person coming from parts of Asia, very big money, traditionally goes into Hong Kong and then forms 3 of these companies in various, in Panama or other tax havens before they invest here. We do not know who owns the companies that are listed in ASIC. We just don't know. So we have been petitioning through the Treasury to try and get ultimate beneficial ownership disclosures compulsory in the corporate world. And there's no question, while they may scream, a lot of wealthy people scream about privacy, it's just not valid. If they want a company in this country with the protections that a company can give, the privileges, they should be prepared to say who owns it.
I saw that as a bit of an extension of Mr McElroy's question, in the sense that can corruption take in tax evasion, avoidance? It's too hard. It's too hard. We recently saw something with the thing that was mentioned before about the boy Cranston and his company, and the press overworked that to buggery. It's a $165 million fraud, and they said it was the greatest white-collar fraud in Australian history. It's about 1/10 of Bond Corporation, by the way. But I thought it was intriguing. At the very same time that everybody was saying, what a terrible, blunt, shocking fraud. Think about this, $165 million in that. The federal court handed down the result in the appeal in the Chevron case, where as a matter of transfer pricing, Chevron had been able to save $340 million. Now, I might say the federal court found against Chevron. They're going to have to pay the tax unless they succeed in the High Court. $340 million. Now, that was described as an episode involving what? Smart accounting? That, I'm afraid, doesn't fit the bill. Just incidentally, think about this for a moment. Ask your friends. Can anybody here think of a good reason why somebody would have a bank account in Panama?
Jeff Lee from the STOP group, Sydney Transport Users Opposing Privatisation. Government buses. Stop. They're in the firing line, the 4 inner west depots. So the rest of them are following soon, and we hope you all mobilise in the marginal seats in the east and the lower north, where the Liberals are more susceptible to pressure than the Labor Green strongholds in the inner west. Now, my question it's a hypothetical. Say you two esteemed gentlemen win your submissions and there is a federal ICAC installed, will it have a time limit on how far back we can go? In other words, the currency that Australia produced and flogged off overseas to lots of overseas countries, or the wheat board head and the sales to Iraq, or as maybe this is one for Richard Ackland next week, the Synodinus water resources event. And getting back to ICAC on a state level, is the failure, the end of Gillian Triggs, the end of ICAC New South Wales?
You're getting her mixed up with Megan Latham.
Well, what I'm trying to say is that I was listening to PM tonight, and the question to the Minister for Water Resources of New South Wales is, why are they going to supply Broken Hill with no water with a 400-kilometre water pipe from the Murray instead of a 150-kilometre water pipe from the Darling, given the fact that there were 23 tenderers, and given the fact that if it goes from the Murray, it'll pass some prospective mining sites in the future. It's 2.5 times as long from the Murray to the Darling to get to Broken Hill. Now, that question was put, and the Minister for Water Resources of New South Wales said, oh, you'll have to ask the Minister for Mining, that one. It's outside my portfolio, and we can't tell you who won the contract because it's commercial incompetence. Is everything in New South Wales commercial incompetence, and how can we get around it?
I forgot your first part of the question. I'll tell you this much. You can't... Oh, yeah, sorry, sorry. That's an important question, because there is an answer to that. When ICAC was set up in New South Wales, it was set up by the Griner government, and the purpose was to look at a whole lot of things which were alleged to have occurred during the previous Labor government. And what the original ICAC Commissioner, Ian Temby, did was say, oh no, this is moving forward. Now, I can tell you right now that's very, very, very likely to be what happens. If a federal ICAC is created tomorrow, anything that happened yesterday will be off the table. I know that might seem disappointing, but I also think this, it's better than nothing.
Yeah, hi. I'm Kieran from the Politics and the Pub Management Committee. Both Labor and the Coalition are opposed to a federal ICAC.
No.
No?
No.
But you're saying that Labor's vacillating.
Yeah.
I read a statement by a Labor left group which states, at a basic level, corruption is the undue influence of capital on the political process, and it is inherently in the interests of the party of Labor to act against it. A federal ICAC is consistent with the Labor mission of a fairer and more just society. So what's the level of groundswell support within the Labor Party for this very view? Does that give you any encouragement?
Amongst the left, it's pretty strong support. I have not spoken to any of them. You normally find that the opposition comes, strangely enough, from those people who had a role in the administrative wing of the party before they entered Parliament. And as you know, that's more or less a rite of passage for a Labor politician, head office into Parliament. So, and they're normally in the right. Right wing is the difficulty. Labor's wavering. Shorten signed up to the Fitzgerald principles. Dreyfus signed up to the Fitzgerald principles. A number of important people did.
Okay.
It's on a knife edge.
It's on a knife edge. That's encouraging.
I don't know.
And also, a federal ICAC will have to be an open tribunal, and will they be televised? I think that would make excellent viewing, better than Big Brother.
Yeah. All we what is interesting is that the mini ICAC they have in Canberra now, the ACLEI, they have never run a public hearing. They've got the powers to do so. They don't believe in it because I think that one of the reasons is the Canberra community is pretty small. They don't have that public the problem of a public which is diffuse in the federal. I think that's it. They feel they better just work privately and talk of other agencies and try and they do mount a lot of prosecutions. They've put a lot of people who used to work at the airports in jail because they were copying it from both sides, and that's how all these guns and drugs get in.
Good evening. I'm Geoffrey Watson, one of the conveners of the Politics of the Pub and the Secretary of the Association for Good Government. And I want to offer another perspective on corruption. It's subordinating human rights to the interests of corporate and investor rights. And I'll give two instances where this happened. One would be an attempt, which was the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which attempted to subordinate our rights to health to corporations' rights to their future earnings. It sounds absolutely ridiculous. And I'm glad that the TPP has been extinguished. But the second, for now, is really, I want to call attention to our very scandalous situation where for every homeless person in Australia, there are 8 vacant housing units. That is absolutely scandalous. And we know that behind it are policies like negative gearing. But we know that politicians will not dare correct the policy distortion, which distorts the very free market that they claim to defend. Because they themselves own 3 to 5 investment properties. And to correct the situation, their interests will be threatened. Shouldn't we address these conflicts of interest proactively before measures like austerity and bailouts to corporations and banks are applied rendering millions of Australians possibly homeless because their properties are foreclosed? Shouldn't instead dwellers be bailed out before the banks and developers, or at least bail out the developers and banks by bailing out first the dwellers and the homeless? Thank you.
My name is Ben Smith, Socialist Alliance. I'd just like to make a comment that some of the worst corruption, the worst atrocities are committed by people who act within the law. Exactly. Now, I was in St. Petersburg recently, and I met a guy who was a colonel in the Soviet army. And when they went into Germany, they picked up a lot of German police officers who were persecuting, communists and Jews and gypsies and so on, or anybody that was likely to oppose the Nazis. And the thing that they said was that you can't touch me. I was acting within the law. And he said that these trials that they had, these officials, Nazi officials, could actually produce the evidence that they were not acting outside the law. And in fact, it's been known as the Nuremberg Defense. You can't touch me because I acted legally. If you'd like to comment.
I get into trouble about that. I've been in trouble. During one of the inquiries, one this fellow came along and said, "Look, I was just acting under instructions. I was just doing what I was told. I did all of that." Now, normally people call that the Nuremberg Defense, but I made an indiscreet remark. I said, "Have you ever heard of Lieutenant Kelly?" And the thing is that that's now the subject of a complaint about me to the New South Wales Bar Association, because it said that by doing that I was comparing the witness's conduct with the disgraceful conduct of Lieutenant Kelly at My Lai. And I was thinking, by golly, I'm glad I didn't say, "Have you heard of the Nuremberg Defence?" Because... But look, the point you made in general is just the key to it. You see, corruption has changed. In the good old days, it used to be Bob Askin behind the desk and getting a brown paper bag with £10 notes in it. But it moved on, and it was Mr. McElroy's question that all of a sudden you've got a different dimension. If you do favours to somebody while you're in Parliament, and then you move into a job with an organisation at a substantial pay, well, of course, they're apparently acting within the law.
Yes, I have a few quick questions. Firstly, lay people are told ignorance is 9/10 of the law. In one of the talks, you mentioned a lot of the corruption happens from very knowledgeable people. If they get busted for corruption, firstly, are they 11/10 of the law, or are they a smaller fraction? Secondly, 70% of all our politicians in Canberra in particular are actually lawyers or have legal backgrounds. Many of them try to exercise their legal immunity. Would taking away some of their immunity actually allow them to be actually a lot more honest, or be forced to open up about things that have been kept quiet? And thirdly, in terms of the way corruption is going around the world, corruption seems to be creating a lot of parallel environments that have sinister flow-on effects. The third world talks about violence or financial fraud, for example. In places like Australia, though, as our systems start to lose their integrity, what other problems are we encountering that needs to be addressed, or should we change our highlight what's going on? And last question I'm going to ask regarding sorry, I forgot the question.
Well, I've forgotten the first one as well. I think you've had... That's enough. The first one about the 11/10, the pretty savage sentences handed down to Obed and McDonald. I went down and I actually saw a couple of politicians on the Thursday night. On the Friday, I was in Canberra. On the Friday, I was at the Qantas Club to come back, and I rang up David Ip after we heard the sentence which had been handed down for McDonald, and Justice Adamson gave him 10 years. I said, "Oh, well, that set back a federal ICAC by 10 years. I can't imagine too many politicians going to do it." I mean, look, the law is very hard. You're a minister who does this. You go behind bars for a long time.
What about the appeal?
I don't know. I don't know. Not very good at that.
Forgot what my question was, but I've just remembered, talk about Nuremberg. Hitler said, "I will not punish any German soldier who breaks the law in the execution of his duty." Do you like that? Now, this reminds me, 29 years ago, Barry Unsworth closed down Pitt Street, which ran all the way from Circular Quay to Lee Street, Botany Road, etc. He's chopped it up in three ways, partly pedestrian mall, one way northbound, one way southbound, two way somewhere else. Now we need that corridor. That'd be a very good place to put Baird's tramway. And it happened 29 years ago, and yet Barry Unsworth is drawing the same salary or pension as he would if he'd been a good premier. Now, when is someone going to come up with a system that will reward good premiers and penalise bad ones?
Yeah, well, that'll cut.
That's my question.
Well, at least they have passed this legislation to take away pensions from convicted politicians. Is that right?
Sorry, Barry Unsworth has not been convicted. I don't know why he closed the Pitt Street traffic corridor.
Yeah, my name's David Hand. Thanks for listening to me. A great pleasure to see you on the table tonight, Geoffrey. I didn't know you were coming. I've been a great appreciator of what you've done in ICAC. My question is that, of course, independent is the first of the acronym. What I'd like you to talk to me about is that these things don't happen in a vacuum. So setting up a federal ICAC doesn't happen in a vacuum, that there needs to be a political will or a public awareness and public opinion move towards it. And particularly in relation to the Margaret Cunneen case, where it went through ICAC and it has had a significant negative impact in public opinion about the need for this, because it speaks to, if you make ICAC independent, who watches the watchdog. And I wondered if you could make a comment on that, please.
Well, the thing is that there is an inspector of ICAC who reports to the Parliament. There's a Parliamentary Oversight Committee. The inspectors of ICAC have been really, really aggressively anti-ICAC for a couple of years, and the inspector's just been replaced and there's a new one, and we'll see how he works out. The thing is that I wasn't involved in the Cunneen inquiry, but I know a bit about that, but I'm not saying that in public. You'll have to catch me later. No, not in a microphone. I won't tell it. Sorry, so sorry.
She was a good woman. She had to go.
Well, yes. Anyway, the thing is that look. No. What I will say is this: is that look, the points that you make are quite good. There was a real public backlash about the Cunneen affair. I'll just pose this question for you. That came to ICAC as a complaint from one of the crime agencies, a federal crime agency. It came to ICAC, which said, and this much is on the public record, possible corruption by a Crown prosecutor. Just think about this for a moment. What would have happened if ICAC had said, alrighty, I'll put that in the bottom drawer? That was an invidious position that they were faced with. You can't cover that up. You've got to do what? Go to a public inquiry. And if she was clean, great, it would have established that. And if she wasn't clean, great, it would have established that. That's the benefit of a public hearing. These things should never be done behind closed doors, because we're never happy. We never know the result. It's when it's ventilated. There was years ago, 1982, some people here will remember it quite vividly. There was a Royal Commission appointed which was going to look at the activities of the BLF. Now, there'll be people here who like the BLF, I imagine, but it was working as a rogue organisation. And there was an application made that that inquiry should be, large slabs of it, conducted in private. They went all the way to the High Court. And Sir Anthony Mason, one of the greatest judges this country's ever produced, spoke about it and said, what sort of misgivings would people have if it was being dealt with quietly, privately, and they can't see it happening? Do you know they call, I saw, that this all stems from the Murdoch press. They keep repeatedly calling ICAC a star chamber. These bastards need to learn a little history. The Stuarts used the Star Chamber as a place to abuse people, but you know how they did it? They conducted it in private. When you put it out in the public can judge whether it's right or whether it's wrong. Nobody here.
Murdoch is evil for Australia.
Just a short comment about secrecy. The courts do issue funny things called suppression orders and even super suppression orders, where you're not allowed to say that there's a suppression order. Now, the Victorians are really good at this. They issued 2 or 3 times as many as any other state. And the question was raised earlier about the note printing scandal, massive scandal. Prosecution, they admitted liability for foreign bribery. This is owned by the Reserve Bank, you all remember. It's a trial still going on in Victoria, but I'm not allowed to talk about it because the Victorian court issued a suppression order about the proceedings that are running on at the moment against the executives. And they've issued a super suppression order on some aspects of it, which is, we're not allowed to tell you that there's a suppression order. How does that happen?
I'm sorry to do this. I know there's other people wanting to ask questions, but this raises big issues. I'll just give you this example. How do you think Peter McClelland's Royal Commission into institutional abuse of children would have gone if it was conducted in private? That's the way that the churches did it for years. They did it in private, they shut it up. I'll give you another example. Who's the biggest opponent of ICAC? Who bangs on about it week in, week out? The Australian, Murdoch. I used to say to my staff, I pick up the Australian, I know it's a Friday because there was an article abusing me. It hasn't happened for a few months. I feel a bit sort of left out. Anyway, just think about this for a moment. I'll just raise this. Remember the phone hacking inquiry called the Leveson inquiry? What caused more damage to Murdoch in the last 10 years? No, Leveson inquiry was way out there. That did him so much damage. Even today, it's damaging the Murdoch press in their application to get the licences and the Sky licences in the UK. That inquiry was public. We saw it. We heard it. The thing is, if we hadn't, they would have gone privately, one after another, and acquired settlements with confidential terms. And you would never have heard about it. That was because it was conducted in private. And now start putting 2 and 2 together and work out why the Australian.
Wayne Sonta. I originally was going to say a bit like the tidal zone is the interface between the ocean and the earth. Corruption is the locus of the interface between the public and private sector, and in which case, to what extent is transparency or non-transparency the nub of the problem, or is there a really intrinsic conflict of interest in the fact of private and public sector? Having looked at public-private partnerships, the whole level of privatisation over 2 decades, is that not corrupt merely because there's legislation and so-called transparency about it? But when I got this map, it suddenly dawned onto me those countries that are apparently not corrupt, as opposed to that corrupt, if you did a map of those who have got human rights and those who don't have human rights, the definers of that would do it. Those who have the efficient economies versus those that don't, it looked like this map. If you did a map of those countries that were the ex-imperial or colonial powers versus the countries that they colonised, vanquished and exploited, the map would look the same. And if you looked at human rights and the propensity of those that have got a lot of human rights and no corruption have of going and doing over the sinful, corrupt countries in red with great regularity, is there something wrong with the way that we are actually defining corruption, or not we, those who are defining corruption, who are also our rulers and elites of our non-corrupt societies, which are leading us into global environmental catastrophe, the possibility of war, economic crisis, despite their lack of corruption and their excess of liberal democracy, which is even apparently better than social democracy. Is there something wrong with the way we're defining this when you look at the outcomes that the so-called non-corrupt societies are providing for the human race and the planet?
Wow, let's have another evening and to talk about that. That is a wonderful question. I am only a lawyer, and I just am very fascinated by that map you're waving around as to what we call non-corrupt, that is where bribes aren't taken as a matter of course, which is not the name of the game. That's how everything happens. In those places, they're all up in Northern Europe. You look at that map, it's quite amazing, plus Iceland. But the question is, even on our limited definition, is it New Zealand, are they less corrupt because they're wealthy, or are they wealthy because they're non-corrupt? That's a paradox, and there's no easy answer. And maybe it's not a cause and effect, but there is a very marked correlation between the two. That these countries that you mentioned will never get out of poverty while their leaders are so allowed to ramp it up. And just at one point, we pay $400 million a year to PNG. No one really gets to how much of that is stolen and reinvested back into Queensland. And the reason is, I suspect, that's because of Manus Island. We are not prepared to ask them where the money's gone.
I was just wondering, when you were talking about the corruption, whether or not inherent in our system of democracy are the seeds of corruption. And what I mean by that is the representational democracy that we have, where our votes tend to go to the person that has the biggest lobby or the loudest voice or the most money. So regardless of what I currently believe I want to vote for and who I want to vote for and say they'll do the job, there's 100 other people with a lot more money than me that's going to tell them how they should vote. So I think inherent in our supposedly democratic system are the flaws to do with representational democracy. The other thing I'd like to mention about that is how then you think about organisations and movements like the New Democracy and other ways that we could perhaps be governed that might be a bit more equitable.
Yeah, thank you. Very good question. I can only comment on one point, which is the use of private donations, political parties. The Canberra will not tackle this issue. They have not tackled it. That's a really sore point with me, why they don't tackle it. And it's not as if there's not an easy answer. You look at the Queensland recent, they've got it all set up and it's working, which is an online register of all political donations. And you can go in, you just tap in on your computer, Queensland donations, and you'll see everyone in the last month who's donated to any political party in Queensland. Why the Feds are not prepared to put such a system in is just beyond me.
You mentioned New Democracy. New Democracy started apparently at a luncheon table when Luca Belgiorno-Nettis was sitting there at a fundraiser for a political party. And Luca's been on Four Corners talking about this, and he was unusually frank. What happened was that his family owned Transfield. Transfield built the harbour tunnel. And he spoke about how they ploughed money into political campaigns, donations, at the time that the contracts were being issued. And the person from Four Corners said, "Did you think that had any influence on the award of the contract?" He said, "Well, we won it, didn't we?" Now, Luca is, what happened was he was sitting at some fundraiser and he thought, what am I doing? I'm participating in this. New Democracy comes from him. It's powerful. It's a great organisation. And it's very fundamentally opposed to the donation system. The people who are on the, for example, Electoral Reform Committee, it's headed by Nick Greiner and Jeff Gallop, both former premiers, one Liberal, one Labor. It's non-partisan. It's really good. We've got to do something. We've got to do something to try and work out how we stop big donors buying political parties, buying positions. I've spent quite a bit of time looking at that, and it's very unsatisfactory. New Democracy's got a whole lot of schemes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So that brings an end to this session of Politics in the Pub. So, ladies and gentlemen, please thank our speakers for their wonderful answers as well as their wonderful talk once again. Now, next week's topic, Miscarriages of Justice, a night with Richard Auckland. Now, that should be extremely interesting. So I see you all same time, same place next week. Thank you.
Richard Auckland's a mate of mine. He's the most fabulously funny guy. You'll have a great time listening to him.
Thank you.